Now I'm going to talk about some of the subsidies that governments can implement and incentives to promote renewables, particularly photovoltaics. So I got a few countries here: Germany, United States, United Kingdom, and Trinidad and Tobago, as we're very familiar with these countries. So at the top here shows the different regulatory policies, fiscal policies, and public financing policies, right? Structures that you can have. So feed-in tariffs is when you can sell power directly to the grid, and the money that you will get for selling it will be higher than the cost that you actually pay for using that power. So you have a buyback rate and a selling rate. So your selling rate for renewables will be higher, and the reason why they have it higher than normal utilities, like for example traditional coal-fired or natural gas electricity, is because it does not have the same environmental damage as those other types of power, so they put a higher value on it. So it's a premium. So feed-in tariffs is a very important structure to have, to promote renewables, as countries that have the highest uptake have these feed-in tariffs. Like for example, Germany, right? And I'll show you the graph of Germany, what their uptake is in the world. They're the largest uptake of highest penetration of PV in the world, right? Germany. United Kingdom has one, United States has one, and the reason why they have a triangle by United States is because the United States has many different states, and each state has their own different things. So some states don't have feed-in tariffs.
Briefly, what's a feed-in tariff?
Okay, a feed-in tariff, like for example, if your utility allows you to connect to the grid, right? If the utility allows you to connect to the grid, you're already paying money to use their power, right? But if now you have solar power on your home, and you're generating electricity, you want to be able to sell that power into the grid now, right? The rate that you would get for selling that power to the utility will be higher than the rate that you actually purchase from the utility. And that's what a feed-in tariff is.
Could you explain the difference in the US? Why these triangles there?
Right, I was just explaining that. So the reason why the US has triangle there is because US has many different states, and each state has different structure. So some states don't have feed-in tariffs. So feed-in tariffs haven't really hit the United States as yet. That's mainly a European thing. So some states might have something that mimics a feed-in tariff, so that's why they have the triangle. Trinidad does not have one yet, but I understand that they're trying to work on maybe a net metering system, which is the difference between net metering and the feed-in tariff is the net metering, the price for purchase and the price for selling is at the same rate. So you're just paying the difference. That's what they call it, net metering, right? So let me just highlight some of the different policies. You can have this feed-in tariff, you can have net metering, you can actually have quotas, electricity utility quota obligation, which means that utilities have to purchase green energy. So they have a quota that they have to fulfill, and this forces utilities to have to purchase a certain amount of green energy. So that's another policy that can put in place. They can have as well, if you look at the fiscal incentives, you can have grants or rebates. This is something Trinidad has, as you can see. You can have tax breaks as well. Like for example, Trinidad allows no tax or no duties on solar panels that are brought into the country. So these are some examples. If you realize that Germany has a lot of things, United States has a lot of things depending on which state you're in. United Kingdom recently, they allowed, not recently, but they allowed feed-in tariffs, but what they did was as soon as they allowed the feed-in tariff, they then decided, wait a minute, we're stimulating too much solar, because a lot of companies started to do a lot of solar installation to get the benefits of the feed-in tariff, and then they slashed it almost in half. And what that created now is a kind of bust and boom, right? So it's really important, not what you implement, but how you implement it. If you implement a feed-in tariff and then you slash it, it's like pulling the rug under your feet. If you, as well as you implement a feed-in tariff and you make the value too high, and you create too many other policy incentives, it's like pouring gasoline on fire, and then you can create an you can saturate the market very quickly, and then, so it's also about how you implement it as well, besides what you implement.
Excuse me, do you have some incentives in the demand side?
The demand side, well, yes, you see basically the time of use system is basically a demand side control, right? This here is now the PV capacity for the top 10 countries in the world. As you can see, Germany is 44%, and that's largely because of the type of feed-in structure that they created. Now, the feed-in structure that they have in feed-in tariff that they have in Germany decreases over time. So let's say if you sign up now, when as soon as they implement it, you get a higher rate. But then if you sign up 10 years later or 5 years later, your feed-in tariff rate will be less. So they gradually weaning you off of it, right? Spain is next in line. Spain recently actually had a crash in their solar market, and that was because when they were implementing their feed-in tariff, they were not checking properly who they were giving what companies they were allowing to generate solar, to set up solar plants. So a lot of companies were setting up solar plants who didn't know anything about solar, and these solar plants were poor and were having a lot of difficulties. So then when there was a downturn in the economy in Europe, because a lot of austerity measures being put in place, and the feed-in tariff structures had to be reduced, and some of the policies had to be taken away because they were getting also funding to actually build their power plants as well, right? These solar power plants. So when the austerity measures put in place and things were reduced, the companies that would never have been able to stand up on their own in the first place because they were not managed properly or the facilities weren't built properly, they fell, they collapsed. So by creating policies that may sometimes, where you don't watch like a hawk, who you're allowing to set up these plants, so you have to have some sort of regulation. You can then artificially prop up companies that shouldn't be propped up, right? Because the thing with business, if you let it be natural, like laws of the jungle, the fittest will survive, right? But if you create a scenario where you allow the weak to survive, then when things become this lack of resources or lack of austerity measures are put in place, then all of a sudden all the weak fall, and then you have a collapse of demand.